Can introduce. We do have two that are joining us electronically, two board members. But my name is Jason Lenz. I'm the chair of this board, and I'm the CEO of Creek Run Environmental, and I represent environmental interests in the state of Indiana.
I'm Tom Navarre, and I'm with Family Express, and I represent the convenience store industry.
Mark Aldis, and I'm here on behalf of the property casualty insurance industry. Gallagher.
Peggy Dorsey, I'm the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Land Quality at IDEM, and I am the Commissioner's proxy.
I'm Nevis DJ with Heartland Environmental, the Principal of Heartland Environmental, and I represent the environmental consultant industry.
Nancy King, I'm the board counsel.
And Dusty Trout.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you guys maybe had to unmute me, but yeah, Trout Mosier, and I represent the independent tank owners of Indiana.
And Toby is the only one. All right, we'll move ahead. I do have some sad news report. One of our board members, Matt Forrester, passed away last Thursday. Matt was appointed to this board last year to represent the financial lending community due to his experience with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis and as the regional chairman of the German American Bank. His expertise and his thoughtfulness will be missed by the board, and we send our sincere condolences to his family. I didn't know Matt personally, and I think he called in at the last board meeting, but was present at the one we had in October. And Kevin, you have some.
Thank you, everybody, for participating online. I just want to let you know that all participants will be muted when they join the meeting, but participants will be able to address the board during the open forum portion of the meeting. We do ask that you identify yourself when speaking. Participants can only send chat messages to the host. For those joining us via Zoom, if you have a question or technical issue during the meeting, please use the raise hand or chat feature. To access the raise hand and chat feature, at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device, you'll see a menu bar. You may have to move your mouse or touch the screen in order for the menu bar to pop up. In the middle of that menu, there's a chat icon, which you can click on to show the chat dialog. You should also see the raise hand option. Please utilize the raise hand or chat features if you have any questions or comments, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If any members of the media have joined us via Zoom, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.in.gov if you have any questions. Thank you.
Do we have anyone on there right now that are joining?
We do have 16.
All right, just curious. All right, we'll begin with Doug and the fund administrators report.
Hey, everybody. I'm happy to be back after a short period of time. So there's not a lot of updates to provide, so obviously this pack's a little bit shorter than usual. First slide. You do it manually. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. It's a little bit hard to read on the screen. So the first part is just a little bit of an update. The only differences are going to be the expenses. The appropriation should be the same for the last quarter. Like I said, our budget balance as of now is still about 24.5 million. And at the bottom, it says that the fiscal year revenue as of December 31st, that's misprint, should be March 31st of 2022. I noticed that a little too late to update it in your packets, but we will get that updated and upload back onto the website. So these are the numbers as of March 31st when we did that data poll. So revenue is about 33.7 million. It looks on month like the revenues from the inspection fees of about 3.5 million on average, give or take. So with another 3 months left, we should get pretty close to what we normally get. Overall ending fund balance, we're currently at 136.9 million as of March 31st. Here, go ahead. Does anybody have any questions about anything on that page? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
What was the external services for that?
Okay, yeah, I had that written down. So external services are anything like contractors, software, that kind of thing. So the 959,000, that's part of us paying for our contract for the database build. So that's the external services.
That's not an ongoing expense, or at least not one that high.
Well, it will be, but it's only for the contract period, obviously. So we should expect that expense to go on through 2024 when the whole build is built out finally. So that's the end of the contract term. At least that's the schedule for right now. We're looking at August 2024 for that.
That's an annual figure.
It will vary depending on what they're actually doing. So sometimes it will be up, sometimes it will be down. Overall, I haven't recommended the exact contract, but I can get the final number of what that would be over the 4 to 5 year build total. Okay, this is the annual revenue and payouts. The two lower ones, that's just the last 2 years. So you guys saw that the last time. The next 3 months on the top, so January, February, and March, those should all be new to you guys. And you'll see the February, there was a pretty large uptick in reimbursement that was related to the lawsuit settlement, which Nancy's going to talk about a little bit more when she addresses that. Go to the next one, Kevin. All right, so claims in paid. So you can see again, the average review time is continuing to go down. You saw a little bit of a bump in March, which I can explain in a little bit more detail. It coincides with the settlement agreement as well. So overall, as of earlier this week, we are down to only 8 claims that are beyond the 45-day review period. When we started tracking this a little over a year ago, I think we were closer to 300. So we're almost 5-day period for all claims. So the reason why those numbers don't coincide, meaning the average review time bumps up in March because that's when we actually process the claims. The amount reviewed and approved and reimbursed is up in February because that's when the payment actually was released from the auditor for that settlement. And because many of the claims that were involved with that were well beyond the 45-day period, and the average review time only comes in when we actually finalize the claim. We did the reimbursement first, and then we went through and applied that individually to certain claims across the board within our own system. So we didn't actually tap them into the system until March. So the numbers went up in March for review time, but the amount reimbursed went up in February. It's steps in the auditor reimbursement, if that makes sense.
So it's in relation to the lawsuit.
Yeah,
settlement.
both of those numbers are in relation to that, because like I said, many of those claims were in-house for a very, very long time, and we were holding off on all of those because they were pending due to the lawsuit, pretty much. And several of those were many, many days, hundreds of days.
How many, I know I saw it, but I didn't count them. How many actual claims were there in that number?
I actually would have to go back and look. It was quite a few. It was well over 100. Do you remember the exact number?
I really don't.
Okay.
I really don't into a lot of detail.
All right.
Regarding a lot of systems.
All right, and are there any more questions as far as the data goes? did want to make one clarification because it was something that I had a question about too. So on the appropriation part, the reason why that number does not match the actual tank revenue, the U.S. inspection fee revenue, is because our appropriation is based off of the biannual budget. So it's set at the legislature, it's just at the legislature. So it's an estimate of what they anticipate. They anticipated us having a revenue of 37 million 2 years ago. So that's what the appropriation is. It doesn't actually alter the bottom line as far as that's concerned, but that's how we set our budget as we move forward. So just because they forecasted 11 million less than we actually took it in revenue or planning to take it in revenue doesn't mean the TL has $11 million less in it, if that makes any sense. And you can go to the next slide. And I will bring up Katie to do the operations section.
I have one question
Sorry.
about the revenue that you take out for the budget. So
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, it's 11% of the balance from the previous year.
Yes, 11% of the revenue from the previous year, correct.
And you took 9, or almost 9, 8.9.
Yeah.
So $12.5 million off of 136 million.
So it's based off of the revenue, not off of the balance, right? Yes, that's correct. And that's the total expenses also includes claim payments. So of the total expenses, that 8.83% is 8.9 million of that is from claims. So not the, and as far as we're concerned, our administrative expenses are capped at 11%. So most of the 8% is from the actual claim payments.
Yeah, I did follow that.
Yeah.
So it helps when expenses when claims that you're paying out are low and the balance or the money you're taking in is high.
Not as far as we're concerned, because we're not basing our 11% off of what's reimbursed and what's there. It's based strictly off of the UST tank pay revenue. So no matter what the claim fees are paid, our 11% only matters as far as that UST inspection fee. So that's the only thing that we would rather 11%. That makes sense, right? It's not.
Good afternoon. I'm Katie Blackburn, the section chief of the USD operations section. Just an update on pending claims. Again, we have to get you guys this information early in the month. So there's the breakdown on the 4th. But as Deb said, as of this morning, for claims in-house over 60 days, the 60 calendar days or 45 days, we're at 8 claims for about $148,000. And all claims in-house, we're at 94 claims for about 3.1 million. So I'm anticipating the backlog being gone, I would say the next month at the most. So we're making progress on that. Last meeting, there had been a few questions about the process that claims go through. Excuse me. So this is just kind of the claim life cycle. It's for, claims prepared and then submitted to IDEM by the consultant or the applicant via email. We have a database and a tracker that we use to manage those. And then they're triaged and processed for initial review. They go through that initial review. Additional review is needed. I do at least a cursory review of every claim that comes in-house. And when I'm done with that, then we process it for payment. And then it's sent to our accounting, who then sends it to the auditor. And that is a typo. They actually have 35 days to issue payment, not 30. Are there any questions about this? Last meeting, there were also questions about why a claim would be reimbursed at 100%. So these are just some of the reasons that we have. The deductible is being met. We do have some historical sites that still have eligibility percentages that are less than 100. We also have quite a few claims that have costs that are not allowed for the ruler statute, such as tasks at higher classification, missing backup. There's a missed 365-day deadline. There's items that just aren't eligible. like CDs or markup on government fees and travel expenses. And then we do have some right now where there's reasonableness and cost effectiveness explanation needed. So again, we will deny that and then give the applicant a chance to explain those things. Are there any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
Do the contractors know what task at a higher classification? There is another one that we get denied and always says, that's generally the biggest one. Why it's denied, it seems like there's a contractor know, why is there so many?
If they've read the rule, they will know that. One that comes to mind is that client communication in the rule is specified at project manager, and we get that a lot at principal and senior project manager. So we have to knock it down to the project manager rate based on the rule.
But you would normally do that. You would knock it down to the lower rate and reimburse.
Yeah, we reimburse the lower rate.
Because in most
We don't
small,
deny it in full.
in most small companies, I guess I don't speak for mine, and, you know, it's, I mean, the principal is sweeping the floors, taking out the trash, taking phone calls from clients and, you know, doing everything. So it's hard sometimes, because we've seen this too. And so it's hard sometimes to kind of differentiate from what you're asking for, but yet also what the client's asking for. And, you know, the task that I need to do as a small business owner. So,
Right, and we're bound by the rule in that case. So if it specifically, if your task description specifically says client communication, that is specified in the rule as a project manager task. So we don't deny the full amount, we just deny it down to the correct labor rate.
yeah, well, I certainly don't have a problem with that.
Do the tank owners have those classifications? In
The
other words,
owners,
yeah, the owners.
So,
I mean, it's in the rule that's public. I can't tell you if every owner has a copy of that in their possession.
But like Tom, and that's the kind of questions we get to when we're trying to explain to them why and may have not gotten reimbursed for that, because that seems to be a common here lately.
It's a very common denial, that's why I mentioned it, because it's very common. Anything else?
I had one question. It's kind of specific, and maybe it's covered on the next slide. I'll wait till you get to the next slide. This is covered.
This also came up, oh, sorry, Roger, did you have something?
And you, the second bullet that talks, eligibility percentage is less than 100%. Is that specific to a different set of criteria than the bullet below that says items not allowed? I understand that, those things are not allowed. So that's going to establish less than 100%. But is this bullet representing a different parameter?
Based on the eligibility determination, there are some historical sites that were found to be 96% eligible. Into the line item denials that would do everything, the entire claim, even if we approve it 100%, it's going to be reimbursed. And that's based on eligibility determination that was determined a long time ago.
I can specify a little. So between 1988 and 2016, when the statute was changed, there was a different set of rules, and for different reasons, like age of your tanks, you would have a higher deductible. But then there were also steps in there like not paying your tank fees and some other issues that was then used to calculate your overall percentage. So from, like I said, 88, we still have some from 88 to 2000, but June 2016, that still have some where they don't get 100%. So
If the release was reported during that time,
Yes,
they
sir.
had a different set of criteria than we do now. Anything else on this one? We did have questions last time about why a claim could be denied for administrative reasons. So I've listed them here, the big ones. We get some, but eligibility hasn't even been determined yet. We can't pay on a claim that hasn't been determined to be eligible. We do have some submittal guidelines there. If those don't match what we need, We do reach out for corrections on most of these things. Sometimes we get responses, sometimes we don't. But an administrative denial does not count towards the 3 times submittal limit. So if you have a claim that gets an admin denial, you still have at least three more chances to submit those costs. Jason, did you have a question on this one?
Well, I guess my question is a little bit more specific, but it kind of deals with rental equipment reimbursement. And I know it doesn't appear so today, but at one point, a year or so ago, that was a big issue. Where item health was tracking, like a PID, for example, how many times a PID went to the site and did it exceed the cost of that
purchase price, yeah.
PID? And so then there was some talk about, not only were you denying that, you were at one point thought about trying to get reimbursed for any overages. And I was kind of wondering where that stands and that policy and how that's enforced.
Do you have anything else for me?
No, so,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
So 2 things. One, yes, we're still tracking all of the rental equipment in the same way. It's something that we started doing then and we will do continuously, just because that is definitely part of the rule. It states that specifically we are not to reimburse beyond the purchase value of any particular piece of equipment. So when we find that, we will cease reimbursement at that point in time. As far as the cost recovery, that is not anything that I've heard from. It's not my call to make for sure. So I do not know exactly where that stands. And that would be something that Brian would have to, that would be a determination he would have to make, and whether or not we have legal authority to do so. So as far as that goes, I don't have a direct answer for you on that, but the tracking we will continue to do. And like I said, it's one of those things we should have been doing all along. We just didn't have the capabilities and resources to do it. So you can. So I made a little bit of a graph chart to kind of explain visually. It's a little hard to explain verbally. I've done it several times over the last 4 or 5 years about why some of these numbers don't look, why the numbers on the month-to-month don't look like they match, right? So the way that our system tracks things, and don't get me started, it is not the most effective manner to do it. It's definitely not the way I would prefer to do it, which is why we're developing another one to be able to get some of the information and data that you guys are asking for in a way that makes sense from an accounting standpoint. But if you look at where the claims reimbursed versus the claims submitted, so anywhere in that month to 2 months. So if it's submitted in month 1, some of it is paid in month 1, some of it is paid in month 2, and some of it we have up until that 60 days, right? So there's always kind of this overarching and overlapping payment. So when we come in on the last month before we come in, when we run the numbers, it's always going to have the amount received versus the amount paid is always going to be very, very different from all of the others because we haven't reviewed processed many of those claims yet. So it's always kind of this tail wagging the dog kind of thing. And it varies widely from month to month. So like I said, this is just kind of to give you a little bit of a visual for how that can spread itself out over multiple months and why those numbers kind of follow and track differently than they should. In the future, the way that the new system will work, we will have different milestones and different, we will be able to have that information and apply it the way that you guys would like to see it, because this is the way I would like to see it too. It makes a lot more sense, but the database that we're using was not developed that way. And unfortunately, it's kind of what we're stuck with until we get into the new system. There were a couple of other questions that you had, like what is the percentage of resubmittals that are reimbursed? We don't have that. Again, that's another thing. It's another data point that we would like to be able to track. But the only way for us to get information now would be to manually review every one of those claims, which would take months. Prepping for each bad meeting. Again, the new database and the way the new data points are going to be tracked inside of that, we will be able to do that. So that will be something we'll be able to provide in the future when that's available, when that's up and running. But unfortunately, right now, it's just something that we aren't capable of doing. At least not reasonably capable of doing. It would take a very, very long time. Other than that, I only have one other announcement. So Some of you know, John Morris moved on to Brownfields, last month. So we are looking for a new underground storage tank branch chief. We did our interviews over the past couple of weeks and selected our candidate, and as of 2 days ago. So he's in the room. Tim Beach is going to be the new petroleum branch chief. So they should be pretty standard to what you would expect. Most of you have known Tim. He's been around for a really long time. Not a lot of surprises that you're going to get from him. So other than that, unless you have any other questions, that's all I have for today.
And I don't want to harp on this, but I do want to bring it back up from a business owner's perspective. If I buy a piece of equipment and I'm taking it to multiple sites and charging the rental fee that has been assigned by Elf. And then I'm maintaining that piece of equipment. I'm updating that piece of equipment. I'm replacing that piece of equipment multiple times, sometimes throughout the life of many projects. I know that's what the statute states, that you can't do that, but we have a lot more cost involved than just the price of that equipment.
Well, and I understand that, but we're also, when we started doing that and reviewing it, we're seeing 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times what that piece of equipment costs. So, I mean, that's fundamentally different than just upkeep and maintenance.
And sometimes replacement.
I understand that, but that's just what the rule says.
I know what the
Specifically
rules,
that that's
but in
the
practicality, it's kind of the way of the world that we have to have.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things that, as we talk about updating the rules and stuff, that's something that can be commented on for adaptation and change, for sure.
Doug, did you want to mention where we are with the audit?
Sure. So we are still working on that. We have a couple of pieces of information that we're still getting to them. They are processing away. As far as I know, we are still on schedule with them to meet our preliminary report deadline, which should be in June. Final report is a little bit, it shouldn't be that long after that. I don't anticipate any issues, but we will have our preliminary report from the auditors in June for us to review and work with them on. Hopefully we should have something by July.
Can I go back to his question?
Sure.
I'm looking at this from a tank owner standpoint. So it's take a piece of equipment that you use, let's say 6 projects.
Mhm.
Okay, so 6 projects he worked on, he charged their client, and they got reimbursed.
Mhm.
So the 7th guy comes along, the 7th project, he charges the client, he doesn't get reimbursed, so the client's not paying.
No.
No.
So it applies per site per
He's
incident.
just talking about your stuff. He's just talking about like the one site.
Yeah, so it'd be per site, so that applies, so it's per site per incident. So you can charge a rental rate up to the piece of equipment per site per incident.
So it's not.
No, it's not an
All
aggregate.
right, it's-
Yeah, no, definitely not that.
You're not tracking.
No.
PID serial
But
number.
no, you're right, you're absolutely right, because
Take it
you're right, because
I
as,
thought you were tracking.
No. yeah, you're right. As I've said before, like the whole structure of all of this is built around like the owner. I mean, it seems because of how we operate with the assignment of rights, we don't kind of have that same kind of pass through, but yeah. So it's definitely to each specific.
Okay, just want to double.
Yeah, no, you're fine with that.
I have 2 other things.
Yeah.
If no one else has anything, I don't want to take all your time, but do we have any active working remediation systems engineered for L sites right now?
I think the last time I checked, we had 2. We have another site where there will be another one. I went when that's going to be installed and spec'd out. I don't know for sure, but there's definitely one other site that I'm aware of where we're going to have an active communication system, probably within the next 12 to 24 months.
And then I got, I don't know this person very well, but he emailed me as the Favreau chairman, and he had a question about UST inspections,
Mhm.
site inspections that you guys go out and do. And he is very upset that apparently, and I don't know, but apparently when they do a UST inspection, that you may write on there based on the age of the tanks that they should think about replacing their tanks. And he seems very upset that you're making that comment when there's no statute that says he has to remove those things. by a certain period of time.
So there is no statute, but there is regulation. And there are multiple factors, there are multiple different situations where this could arise. So based on the new regulation, EPA has implemented multiple recommended practices. A lot of those recommended practices for tank life and tank compatibility are based on warranty. And if you do not have a warranty or you've done something to void the warranty of the tank, those tanks are no longer viable in the EPA's eyes. And we're taking a little bit of a different stand on that, especially with regard to compatibility. And we were trying to work with people to allow things like structural integrity tests and relining of, let's say, first generation fiberglass tanks. Those are not rated for any level of ethanol. And any person that's put ethanol, or which is any fuel other than 19 gas stations in the state that serve pure fuel, every single one of those has voided their warranty. And EPA has taken the stance that those have to come out. We have not. We're allowing a lot of people to do some things and ensure that those tanks are, like I said, they have structural integrity to hold the lining and allowing relining to allow people to kind of spread out their capital a little bit more. But when we're talking about those tanks, we're talking about tanks that are older than I am. I'm 40. We're talking about tanks that are 50 years old. The standard life of a tank is between 20 and 30 years. Period. That's just what they are. And we just got an order to close or a closure notification form for a site that's pulling tanks that were installed in 1952. So again, there are separate issues. One is for more of your Gen 2 and Gen 3 fiberglass and steel tanks, and then the other is your Gen 1 fiberglass tanks.
I'm on your side on this one, but if he's listening on electronically, you know, are you making a reference to something when you write that on his inspection form?
We're not making a specific reference on the inspection form, but we do put that into any violation letter or enforcement
So you-
referral. That's where it will go.
So you're trying to communicate to tank owners
Yes.
that at some point in the future, there's this set of tanks that they're going to have to think about replacing.
Yes, yes. Like I said, I mean, just the general rule of thumb, I think you've all heard me say it, that 20 to 30 years on tanks.
And the best way to do that is through the inspection form, you think?
Well, that's when we're catching it and that's when we're seeing it. So yeah, that's when we're doing the whole review, the whole file review of exactly what we have on the ground and that kind of thing. But yeah, no, it is pertinent to this board for you guys to understand the first generation fiberglass tanks that we have out there. There are still several hundred. We still have several hundred, almost 1,000 line tanks. Those line tanks are supposed to be just a kind of pass through to give people some time by the EPA. As a matter of fact, most states sunsetted those at about 5 to 10 years. EPA stated it was good to give you 10 years. Now we are nearly 30 years past that upgrade. 30. So we're starting to see them fail and we're starting to see them blister. First generation fiberglass tanks, I'm sure Jason and you has known, put enough ethanol in those and you get phase separation, you have higher ethanol content at the bottom, and it's all right in it. And we end up with more releases.
And they can't be repaired now. If they fail, they have to come out.
If they fail, they have to come out, that's right.
And so they were done in the 90s
Yep.
or 1998. A lot of times to save money, and if they had an environmental problem, it wasn't identified at the time.
Correct, yeah.
So, and I think that's what is concerning some of these tank owners now is, you know, it's expensive just to replace tanks, and they might find something that they're gonna have to clean up.
Right, no, I understand that. And, but you know, the thing is, we don't have the same eligibility requirements we have. Right, I mean, I just had this conversation yesterday with people not reporting releases timely, and I don't understand why. I get that you don't want to have it, but there are two requirements to get into the fund now. It's that you report within 30 days, and it's that you have the site registered. Tell me that you have a gas station, you report. You've got 15,000 out of pocket, and we're going to cover you for 2.5 potentially, right? So, I mean, that's a lot of money that we're willing to provide, even if you do find that release. And from an environmental perspective, because that's part of my job too, I would rather have these tanks out of the ground than have someone worried about reporting that release. Now, being pragmatic and reasonable, the reason why we are doing some of the things we're doing is, you know, Tom and I had this discussion a couple of years ago, and I think Jason and I probably had it too. We understand that there is a supply chain shortage of a lot of this equipment, and it's, you know, wreaking havoc on all of you guys. What did you say? It took you an additional 8 months to get tanks in the ground, and you ordered them before the pandemic. So, you know, we get it. We're trying to help folks stay in business as any way we possibly can until we can get these older tanks replaced and get things replaced. But at the end of the day, if they've got to come out, they got to come out. You know, I can't have something that we know is leaking stay in the ground.
Can you pick a date in the future that somebody might come out and say, hey, these fiberglass line tanks have to be out by X?
My goal is within 3 to 5 years, we won't have any first generation fiberglass tanks in the ground. That's my goal.
Will that be, is that your goal or do you think that's EPA's goal?
EPA's goal is that they all come out now. Now, the good news for the owners and operators is that underground storage tanks is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the EPA. They don't want anything to do with it, and we have state program approval, so they aren't going to come in and overfile. They have never done that, and they never will. They give us a lot of leeway. I coordinate with them and let them know exactly what we're doing here and why, and they don't push back on us on that. So I don't anticipate that being any problem with the EPA. But that would be based on their regulation and their guidance, that would be what they would say. But they're not here making the calls, we are. So like I said, I think it's a lot more reasonable to give business owners some time to deal with the supply chain wreckage and get the equipment and things that they need in, and we'll help them move along any way we can.
This is Trout Mosier. I have a question.
Sure.
You hear me? Okay, great. Hi, Doug, by the way. And so I noticed the total revenues are continuing to outpace the claim payments. And I guess as a tank owner in Indiana, I can kind of foresee that that's going to probably stay that way for years to come. Because as monitoring keeps getting better, the equipment keeps getting better, the tanks overall are getting newer. But like you guys were saying, we are getting more and more push to get rid of 40-year-old and older tanks. And we see that, yeah, maybe someday we won't even be pushed anymore. We'll be, it's going to be mandatory. Do you foresee ever the excess liability fund expanding its scope to hopefully help in those situations of getting rid of old tanks that may have more potential to leak, to get newer tanks and it just help with almost like a preventative measure of environmental contamination?
Did I email you and ask you to ask me that question, Trout?
What's that?
I said, did I email you before and ask and tell you to ask me that question? But no, absolutely. I know you were involved with the board previously, but I mentioned that before. I believe I even mentioned it in Senate testimony. Jason was there and heard me say that as well. But this is when the fund was struggling. They asked, well, what are you going to do if the fund becomes viable and all of this? And I said, well, I'd like to put the money, if it were my choice, I would like to put the money back in your owner and operator's hands to do things that are more preventative, like tank removals of older tanks, right? And other types of preventative maintenance type activities. Now, what the structure of that looks like, anybody can take a guess. It's really not my call, and but the bottom line is we don't have the statutory authority to do that right now. So that would have to change. And when that does, it would really involve what the owners and operators want and what kind of program they would want and how they want those reimbursements to look. But I can imagine 50 different ways to do it. Right now, yes, that's definitely something that's always been in the back of my mind. It's always been something that I've been striving for. It makes a lot more sense to prevent them than to pay for them when they happen.
Along that, go ahead.
No, it's great to hear, and I'd be on board with listening or even being involved in trying to find ways to make rules changes or whatever to make something like that happen.
Along that same lines, you got a tank owner that had a problem before, cleaned it up, got an NFA or ERC or whatever. Now all of a sudden he's gonna say, well, should I replace my tanks? Well, if he does, he may have a whole nother environmental, you gotta remove that dirt, just can't take that dirt because it's got EFC, it was cleaned up to a certain level, which was fine as long as it changed. All stayed in the ground, but it was fine. But also he's digging up those old tanks, now he's got this huge environmental. Was the fund, did they reopen a case like that? Did they reactivate or is this guy to say, Now I gotta replace the tank, and I'm gonna get $300,000 out of my pocket to get rid of the dirt and all that other stuff. So how does that address going forward when you want somebody to be proactive and it's like, I'd like to be proactive, but cost of tanks is one thing, but now doing the environmental completely on my own, and I took an ERC, which, or NFA earlier, so forth.
Yep, so, well, there's three things to say, I guess, about that. One, I have offered in multiple situations, to remove old tanks for corrective action and to over excavate the soils, your standard dig and haul, on sites over the past 5 years, to pay for it with the using corrective action funds. I've had 0 people take me up on that offer to remove the dirt and contaminated soil at the point in time when that release is reported and we're actually trying to remediate it. I haven't literally had 0 people do that. The second part is, I agree that's an issue. To close it out with contamination left in place for the past 5 years, it is one of the most resounding ways in which me and the consulting community have completely agreed. I do agree that that is an issue. I do agree that that's something the health fund should pay for from a policy standpoint. But from a legal standpoint, we can't. It's not in the fund right now. It's not in the rule. It's not in the statute. Does it make sense? I absolutely think it does make sense to pay for disposal costs. But that's a policy stance. That's not anything that I have the authority to do right now. Well, I guess it was just 2 points, not 3, sorry. So yes, the third one is, do I envision something like that changing? Sure. If, you know, empowering you guys, I've talked to Chris about this over the last couple of years, empowering you guys to make some of these changes. What that looks like, I don't know. I'm willing to help any way I can in formulating, language or discussing the issues to make it work the way that you guys want to. But in my opinion, I think for that, it would require at a minimum a rule change, but potentially a statutory change.
But to me, that would be worth pursuing.
I
Definitely worth
I don't disagree at all. I don't disagree at all. I think that is absolutely worth pursuing.
It could be an impact to further development or costs. So you think you're saving money by closing the site, getting an ERC, and then down the road, you're deciding to develop it, and all of a sudden, now you wish you would have took that ERC, or you wish you would have pushed back a little bit more up front. So
Yeah, well, I mean,
we've
so
seen
there-
that happen a number of times.
yeah, and there are two sides of this, right? So the health side of this is, so as far as leaving contamination in place, that's the petroleum side, that's the remediation side, right? That's a technical determination based on the guidance, based on risk guidance. Now, does that end up saving money? Yes, but it's not, the ELF isn't wagging the dog. They're not the ones saying, ELF wasn't the one that put 1162 on the books, right? So is that the overall outcome? Yes, but we're not doing it to save money. We're doing it because that's the technical guidance, right?
It's just what happens.
No, again, I agree. That's one I've always agreed with. It makes logical sense when you're leaving contamination in place to, at a minimum, reimburse for the disposal of those soils when redevelopment occurs.
So like,
Or tank removal occurs, right?
like Nevis and I, in the industry that we're in, how do you,
Well, we're seeing this in the brownfield realm daily, where we're going in on, whether it's posy sites or other sort of orphan tank sites where we're moving tanks and digging out 1,000 tons.
Yep.
Pretty regular. In fact, I just did 2 this past fall. So it's just a regular occurrence, which is only to facilitate redevelopment. How that works in the guise of ELF, what we have to wrap our heads around, it sounds like, but regularly we're seeing redevelopment being hindered by old tanks and contamination that's left in the ground because of ERCs or FAs or vacant orphan tanks that just aren't dealt with through the current ELCF.
Right. Anything else? Right, that's it for me.
Last but not least, I'm going to give a couple of updates on some agency activities for you folks. The first thing I think I mentioned it the last board meeting, I wanted to mention the lawsuit that was settled. It was settled on the case. I think you all know the case that was brought against us. It was settled and the case was dismissed on February 25th of this year. The terms of the settlement are confidential, so none of the parties, neither us nor the other parties are supposed to provide public statements. So this is not a public statement, by the way, regarding the settlement. However, all the claims were resolved within the lawsuit, and the payment from the fund was for reimbursement of ELF eligible claims. That's the total amount that was paid for this lawsuit. So unfortunately, I can't take questions on it, again, because we have a confidentiality agreement for the settlement. But yeah, we feel that it was a difficult thing to get through, but we think it worked out well. And I think that we were happy with the settlement on all sides. So that's about all I can say about that. The other thing I wanted to mention is an update on where we are with the draft rule. We have been meeting on that. We have the draft rule basically in draft right now. One of the things that we've been working on are the list of costs. If you'll recall from the old rule, there's a list of sort of costs that are paid. And based on a lot of the discussions that we've been having here today, so some of the things we're talking about is maybe a restructuring of that. But basically, we're to the point now where I think that we're ready for the work group. We've had several folks ask us for that. And Chris can attest that the work group on these rules is something that we've always done. I hope this one won't take as long as the last one, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was like 2 years or something like that, maybe even longer. But we got through a lot of stuff on that one, but I do think that, as Jason and I were talking about earlier, having a work group and having the folks who are using the rule, and this is a little bit of a unique rule in that you have several different levels of sort of participation. We're very used to dealing with the folks who submit claims, which are the contractors generally. So having the owners involved, having everyone involved in the work group process will allow for the discussions that we've been having to really take effect within the rule, that we can really look at a way to structure the rule so that it works for, everybody. And I mean, I've been doing this for a very long time. So the minute you finish a rule, you miss something every time. So that there's always, but having more people involved in it makes that less of an issue. That people need to take some ownership of the rules, and the work group process helps with that. So we're hoping to have some documents that, pardon me, we can get out to folks pretty quickly and try to start setting up some work group meetings into the summer, or in the middle of the summer. It's anymore with the kind of the way the school schedules are for folks, it's really difficult to schedule things in like June and July, just because we've got such a compressed ability to take vacations and things. So that's usually kind of difficult for us. But beyond that, we really want to get this moving so that we can start working as a group to work through this rulemaking. So I just wanted to tell you guys where we are, and that it's actually coming. It's not actually Santa Claus who doesn't. So that was really all I had to say about that. And then I can actually answer questions on it.
Well, before we open it up, we were talking about not having a July meeting, but having an August meeting, just because of how hard it is to get people in the same room in July. So what was the date we were going to shoot for? August 25th. So that's when the next FAB board meeting will be.
Hopefully by then we'll be able to provide some information. We'll have the report for the audit too, so the timing of that would be pretty good. Ideally, we'd like to get the rule work group process started a little bit before that if possible, or very close to that August date, so we can sort of talk about it at the board meeting too. But we should be able to start moving on that pretty quickly.
There is a process to be on a committee.
Well, our work groups, there's not a process. It's basically, if you want to be on the work group, you're on the work group. I think what we'd like to do is, once we have some documents ready to go, we can send them out to the board members, obviously, and for interested folks. And generally what we do, we'll say, a lot of times what we'll do is in our notices, the official notices for these things that end up in the Indiana Register, we have sort of standard language for the notice that says, if you want to work group, let us know. But that aspect of it is not, just to kind of tell people where to get a hold of us. But in this case, we would reach out to you guys, and then anyone who is involved, who wants to be on the work group, we can provide information, we can get it out on the website. You can just call us and let us know that you want to be involved, and then we can kind of get that list going and start to set those up. There's no sort of formal way that we go about work groups there. It really just, we tailor it to whatever the issue is. But we've done a number of our rules, especially our more controversial rules. We've had work groups on, and we do try to not have them go to them for years. It's just sometimes that happens. I'm not blaming you, Chris. But sometimes it does take a while, but I think you end up with a better product. That's at least my opinion.
Okay, well, we'll open it up for any questions or concerns, either for us up here or anyone in the audience.
So I want to get back to this ERC. Roger Disler with McClure. This ERC NFA question that you were just asking about. So if we have a site that we, obviously lately we've done a lot of ERCs. But if it's a new release, is it not covered? As a new incident number? You were saying the owner would have to pay for it?
I'm not sure what you're asking exactly.
So he was saying if somebody signed, you got an NFA on a piece of property and you sign an ERC and they dig up the tank and now you've got contamination.
Yeah, so
Someone won't cover it?
no, not if it's the old incident, it would, that's kind of the problem, right? So Tom said, say Jason sold Tom a site, Jason got an NFA, and then Tom 5 years later was to remove the tanks. After we issued Jason an NFA, Tom would have to pay for disposal of the contaminated soils. That's the way that it's structured right now.
But if you have a site and you put in new tanks, you pull the old tank and you got, that's when you discovered the contamination.
No, it's a pre-existing contamination that was already left in place.
Okay.
So if it was new contamination, we would reimburse for that.
How do you know?
There's a lot of ways to know. So we would do a pretty intensive review of the historic file and any of the data that's come in. We may ask for specific sampling. There's different types of weathering technology you can look at, some more reliable than others, but generally speaking, we've got the CSM, the conceptual site model from the site at the time it was in FA, we would be able to discern whether or not that was new.
Okay. And then can I ask you a question about a specific site?
I mean, you can ask. I mean,
Okay,
maybe,
so
I
I have a site that has off-site contamination.
Yep.
And they're wanting an ERC on both our site and the off-site property.
Yes.
The off-site owner is a city, municipality, that plans on developing it residential.
Okay.
So they do not want an ERC. And we're struggling trying to get remediation approved.
Well, so for one, the offsite contamination, give me the site and everything, and I'll be able to answer a little bit better. But that's not going to be the determining factor for us. It's not residential now, it's commercial now.
It's
Right.
zone residential.
It is zone residential now. So, and they don't want the ERC because it excludes residential. I would have to look at the numbers, and there may be a potential to amend the ERC if we can show that. And actually, first of all, so there's some misconceptions with the ERCs in a lot of contexts. I have to look exactly with the residential restriction, what that means. But a lot of the things, especially like the drinking water, what it says in the ERC isn't necessarily that you can't install a drinking water well. It says you can't do it without contacting the agency first and ensuring that when you install it, it's not going to cause environmental harm. Right? So if you can prove to the agency that it's not going to invite environmental risk, you can go ahead and do it. It's the same with vapors, right? So you can utilize something as long as you can show that, or the change in the property, that vapors are not going to become persistent again in the coordinated context, for instance, right?
And that's the real concern is the vapors.
Well, so if they're gonna build residential, as long as they're not building basement, we don't see vapors in petroleum sites be an issue very often. It's well less than 1% of our sites that involve have indoor air vapor issues. Far less than 1%. Most of ours is groundwater contamination. and shallow groundwater contamination. That's just the way that petroleum reacts in the environment. It just doesn't normally. It's not that it doesn't happen. It does. I have 2 sites right now where that's an issue.
So I understand that, but how do I convince the city? How do I get that done?
Well, that's a difficult question. So, if you email me and give me the site, I can look at it a little bit further. We can discuss it.
Come on up, Troy.
Sure, I have a couple things. One, I'm Troy Smith with IWF Consulting. One, I have a question. We went through this process now. We had this great process in place where you get pre-approvals on claims. And I noticed we're getting denials on stuff that's been pre-approved. I don't understand totally why that would be.
It would, the only reason I think we would deny that is if the work performed didn't match the work that's pre-approved. But again, if you give me the specifics, I can look at it a little bit. better.
In some of the instances, I know we may have used a lesser level person where we had so many hours for a project manager, we used a staff person.
Right.
But all the staff hours now are denied, it's actually saving money to the project.
Okay.
So I guess I need to match up to what's pre-approved then.
No, just go ahead and email me that's something that I'll definitely look at. It sounds reasonable.
The other thing is I'm glad we're discussing it now today, but I feel a storm of brewing. Last several years, we have given a lot of NFAs out there with high levels of contamination left on site. And now we start feeling the pressure that we are going to do a bunch of tank replacements. So I hope we're prepared and ready for that because, like I say, there's a lot of pressure and we have a lot of worn out systems out there. We do. And so hopefully we do move forward and take those in consideration because we've got a lot of sites that need to be addressed.
Just piggyback on what Troy said, we have had many pre-approved scope of works knocked down. And it seems to be where after the scope of work was approved and we maybe use a staff project person instead of a senior project person, because that's what we had available. And then when we submit the form, we were expecting that it would be pre-approved for what we had originally agreed to. And then it was, a number of hours would be knocked down. And I don't know, that didn't sit very well with me. So I'm kind of like Troy, if it was pre-approved and we went round and round, usually there's multiple conversations to get something pre-approved. And then once it's approved and we go out and get the work done. So I just thought I just think it should be paid at that moment. It's almost like we're invoicing IDEM, not submitting a claim. I mean, I know we're not, but you see my point.
Yeah, got you. Like I said, I've seen different situations where that's been reasonable to justify, just because the work was not the same as what was pre-approved. But in each of the specific instances you're talking about, I would have to see what that pre-approval is in the claim. So send me the incident number of that so that I can look into it a little bit more and I can respond.
You're going through the whole claim review process.
No. I'm saying in this instance, if you let me know which one it is, I'll look at the pre-approval versus claim and find out the information, exactly why it happened, and whether or not that was.
But on the next one, if we get something pre-approved and we submit a claim, you're going through the review process, say, okay, well, they use this guy instead of this guy, so we're going to deduct X.
So the pre-approval claim review is an expedited process, and they're literally looking for line to line of that. So I just need to find out exactly why it's happening the way that you're saying it is, so that I can be able to either address it internally or give you a response.
Because if it was the other way, or it ended up costing me more hours or more time, you certainly wouldn't pay that, and I wouldn't expect you to.
Right. So I get it. Like I said, I have to see it first. So.
Well, and there hasn't been, here lately, and I'm not saying in the last month, but in the last year or so, we haven't had this give and take with IDEM in that process. There seems like it's hard to talk to a claim reviewer when they're actually reviewing it. It's hard to get those little details worked out when a quick phone call will take care of it. We can't get anybody, they're not calling us, and so we're waiting the 45 days or whatever we said it takes to see that something was denied. So,
And to Troy's other point, he's absolutely correct. I think we're seeing it's coming from a consulting standpoint. Now Jason's seeing it. These old systems are coming out, these NFAs, these ERCs with orphan sites in particular and brownfield sites. We're seeing more people calling us on a daily basis, almost saying, hey, I have an ERC, redevelopment is pending. How do we deal with the residual contamination of the ground? It's not a question of if it's already coming. So having the conversations on how to deal with that moving forward is something we're going to start having. Absolutely.
Good afternoon, Chris Braun on behalf of the Indiana Food and Fuel Association. The timing of today's meeting is actually wonderful because we had our annual impact meeting last week where we have petroleum marketers from Kentucky and Ohio and Indiana and Michigan here, as well as we had our board meeting. And there were some things that came up that I'd like to share with you. First of all, Katie, thank you and your staff for the improvement on the timetable and claims handling. We greatly appreciate it. And I know the consultants and tank owners who rely upon that greatly appreciate it. I was not a counsel of record in the class action lawsuit, so I have a little more liberty to share with you because I think people understand the magnitude of the settlement. It's been very understated today. And I can say that when it was filed about 2 years ago, there were some very strident allegations made against IDEM and in particular against Doug Laux. Both the Food and Fuel Association and all my experiences with IDEM is that we welcome people from all backgrounds, all nationalities, all faiths. New Americans, as they are described, are certainly welcome in our industry, and they play a vital role. And in the class action settlement, in the class action litigation that's put forth, there was no finding of any discrimination by IDEM or by Doug Laux, and I think that needs to be emphasized. There was no class action certified. They were seeking to certify an entire class or a series of classes. They did this years ago. For many of you may remember, Joe Peters, former owner of MDK, had a single station up north. And once they got a class action certified, it resulted, ironically, in the same law firm generated about a $14–15 million settlement, of which over $10 million went for legal fees. This case involved 102 different sites. So the potential magnitude for an extraordinary attorney's fee claim being paid either by IDEM or by ELF was potentially extraordinary. And there was no class action certified in this case. And again, no attorney's fees were awarded as part of there was no fee shifting provision that was found to be applicable. There was no discrimination found on behalf of Doug Laux or any of his actions, et cetera. So we're very pleased, and we think it's a good result for the industry to get this case resolved. Got it resolved in our view. They had over $6 million worth of claims, and they got settled for about $3.2 million. So we applaud IDEM. And in particular, I'd like to emphasize the appreciation we have for the two lead lawyers that handled this. It was Wayne Turner from Hoover Hull that was representing IDEM, and Don Snemis from Ice Miller was representing Doug. And both those lawyers are outstanding lawyers and did an exceptional job here. So we really appreciate their fine efforts. And also there were lots of people within IDEM who worked closely with them. I know Nancy and many others were intimately involved in this lawsuit, and we really appreciate your efforts in getting in my view, a very favorable settlement and outcome of this. The third point was, you've already touched on it, we would like to move forward with all deliberate speed on the rulemaking. That there's been a lot of litigation over the last several years in the Bullitt case and others about what is cost effective, what are reasonable expenses. And trying to bring more clarity to that would be a benefit to everybody. Having task-based billing, for instance, that you've already identified. So for instance, you start off with a set fee for so many on a quarterly monitoring report. And then if you have a changed circumstances or additional wells, whatever, you can do a change order beyond that. But we do think that it would benefit tank owners, consultants, and IDEM to get more in the pre-approval process, get more in the situation where we all know going in what those costs are, and it would accelerate even further, I think, Katie's work and shorten the time period there. But it is something that we very much are supportive of with IDEM, and we want to work hand in hand in work groups and otherwise to come up with language that we're all comfortable with to determine, what are reasonable cost-effective expenses. I want to underscore also the point made on pre-approvals. We're getting some static back from some of the tank owners that again, we applaud pre-approval. We want that. We think it's a good thing for everybody. So everyone knows going in, the scope of the work and what's the expected expenses. But yet when it gets submitted, we're not getting back what was put in, what was pre-approved. So we're willing to, again, work with IDEM to sit there or snafus out there that we can fix. That would be helpful. But it's becoming a more common complaint I'm hearing from tank owners. And then we're also hearing, again, the next point is on cleanups. That one of the situations that arose because of the GOLAR's activities out in the field and then ultimately their lawsuit is that I know there was a lot of pressure and there were a number of, it's sort of like the pendulum swings, right? The pendulum swung more towards, let's just get these sites to NFA and get them to ERC because that'll cut off the expenditures. And as a result, we've left on more than a few sites, a higher level of contamination of the site than we normally would have in past years. But it helped save the fund, helped keep the fund viable, and helped cut off some abusive practices going on in terms of the way systems were up and running. So we'd like to see flexibility. IDEM currently has an ERC. They have language that oftentimes proposed that if conditions change, IDEM has the ability to reopen. But that should, in our view, should be expanded. And if we need to go to the legislature, we'd like to have your help. If we need to do it rulemaking, we'd like to do it. But we'd like to have also the tank owner or the property owner have the ability to reopen. So if you have a situation where a site's achieved no further action termination with an ERC at a certain level of contamination, but when you go back in now and you redevelop the site or you put in new tanks or do whatever, now that's a change condition. And we need to come up with language. And Doug's already articulated that if we don't have the language now, we need to get it either through rulemaking or through the legislature. But we got to provide flexibility because we're seeing more and more sites that have, and we're fine as long as it stays in the current condition. But when those conditions change, IDEM has right now a unilateral ability to go in and say, well, if you're going to put footers in and you're going to open this site and there's going to be exposed soil, notify us, et cetera. Well, we'd like to see that reciprocated and allow tank owners or property owners that when they want to go in and redevelop the site, that they can also then contact IDEM and say, conditions have changed, we're going to repurpose this site or whatever. And that may mean reopening the prior ELF incident number, as opposed, because it's residual contamination that traces back to the prior, because we need to continue to allow for the redevelopment of these sites and improvements, et cetera. So we'd like to work with you on that. The next one is as to the $136 million in the fund. One of the things that we'd also like to have discussions with IDEM, particularly early now, it's April, but the next legislative session will be upon us. And we touched on it before, but one of the areas that we think that the money can be properly used for with some legislative changes is with the above ground storage tanks. Above ground storage tanks are in the chain, if you will, supply chain. So it goes from the terminal, oftentimes it goes to a bulk plant or above ground storage tank, it's stored there, and then it's delivered to farms or other places. The oil inspection fee is collected at the terminal. So those gallons have already contributed to the ELF fund. So even though they're not necessarily going to an underground storage tank, they are a necessary part of the supply chain
Something went
for.
wrong. Please try again.
Okay, I'll try again.
It's on site.
I'll try this again. They are in the supply chain, but you've already collected the oil inspection fee at the terminal. And so we think it's appropriate now to expand the scope of the ELF fund. So it's not limited just to underground storage tanks, but also to above ground storage tanks that are integral to the supply of fuel to the residents of Indiana. And then lastly, we'd be open again to the idea, we did this a couple years ago, and I think it worked very, very well, is that there were appropriations from the ELF fund over to brownfields and to IFA that allowed for money to be available to pay for abandoned gas stations. They are an eyesore and a legacy of the industry. We think it's a very related cause as it relates to the purpose, as it relates to the ELF fund. And so we would be open to, again, having some money allocated to continue to clean up these former sites. We think that would be a benefit for everybody. It will remove eyesores, it'll get sites cleaned up. And we'd be open to having discussions about, how much or how often should dollars go over there for those. I know that the folks at Brownfields do an amazing job of getting those sites cleaned up at a ridiculously cheap price. I mean, they are very tight with the money, and they do a great job of getting a lot of bang for the buck on those. So we'd be open for that. So those are the points I wanted to share with you on behalf of the IFFA, and be happy to answer any questions that you have. And if not, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Is there anyone else in the audience that'd like to speak?
Not normal.
Comments from any board members? Any questions on that? Okay, well, I'll see, I guess meeting is adjourned, and I'll see everybody on August 25th.